Good afternoon. I'd like to open the Wednesday, November 14th Planning Commission hearing to order. Heather, if you call the roll.
Mr. Granger?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Mr. Klee?
Here.
Ms. Macbeth?
Here.
Mr. Edwards?
Here.
Mr. Schaller?
Here.
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
We have minutes from our two meetings from October. Are there any additions, corrections, or accept them as written?
In the regular meeting, during the discussion of the proposal to allow special outdoor events in the Museum Sport District, I think I'm given credit with a comment that I didn't make because I'd recused myself from that discussion. So I'm not sure who made that discussion, but if we could correct that, that'd be great. Thank you.
So if anyone thinks that they should have the attribution of that comment, which is on page 3, let Heather know after the meeting if you look at that. Beyond that, that they are approved as written with that correction. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye as to the regular meeting, abstain as to the work session.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Schaller?
I abstain for the meeting, but aye for the work session.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Okay, we have an item on our consent agenda, SPR 18-13, the High Street Apartments site plan. Is there any desire to move that off of the consent agenda? So then we'll stay on the consent agenda, which means we vote on it.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Schaller?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Which brings us now to our public hearings. We have 4 items, but what will be 2 distinct public hearings. The first hearing is PCR 18-28, the request of Williamsburg James City County School Board to amend their special use permit for James Blair Middle School to include a bike shed. Erin.
Good afternoon. Williamsburg James City County Public Schools is requesting to amend their special use permit granted for James Blair Middle School on January 14, 2016 by adding a 12-foot by 16-foot bike shed behind the school at 101 Long Hill Road. The shed will be used to store bikes for instructional purposes at the school. The property is designated as public, semi-public in the 2013 Comprehensive Plan, which includes government facilities, churches, public and private schools, fraternal organizations, nursing homes, and cemeteries. Land to the north and east are designated as low-density, single-family detached residential and corridor commercial land use, with lands to the south and west designated as corridor commercial economic development, William and Mary, and Parkway and recreation land use. This property is zoned single-family dwelling RS2, and the property to the north and east are zoned RS2 and B2, with lands to the south and west zoned B2 and ED2, William and Mary, and RS2. The RS2 district allows, with a special use permit, public or private elementary, middle, and high schools, colleges, and universities, including temporary classroom facilities, when accessory to the same lot as the school is located in a permanent building. The architectural review for this property is not required as it is not in an ARB district. The Site Plan Review Committee met on October 17th and recommended approval of this plan. The applicants are proposing the addition of the shed on the northwest side of the school. There is no place currently on site to safely and securely store the bicycles used in the physical education and after-school programs. The proposed shed will provide a convenient location for the bicycles to be stored, ensuring that they are properly secured when not being used. The property is adequately served with essential public services, such as streets, drainage facilities, fire protection, public water and sewer facilities. The proposed project is in harmony with the adopted comprehensive plan and the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. This proposed use is in harmony with the character of the adjacent properties and will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant ecological, scenic, or historic significance. The project is designed and sited so it will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of adjacent properties or surrounding neighborhoods. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council approval of the request to amend the previously approved special use permit for Williamsburg, James City County Public Schools by adding the 12-foot by 16-foot bike storage shed at James Blair Middle School as shown in the conceptual plan. I'm available if you have any questions, and a representative from the schools is here as well.
Any questions? I had a question because the site plan link, at least, it doesn't seem like the site plan has not been materially changed from the original site plan. We've just added this additional building. I mean, it didn't obviously change any parking, didn't change any landscaping. It's just,
Correct.
and the building, the shed will be, we don't have a rendering of it because it's not an ARB, but has a rendering been seen, or is it going to be?
It's a very simple, I think it has 2 windows and a
But it
gabled
will be
roof.
relatively reasonable based on the school that's being next to or something like
Yes.
that. You've seen, okay, cool. That was the only question. We didn't seem to have that. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well then we'll open the public hearing, and if the applicant would like to come speak first or not, that's fine too. Anyone else would like to come speak on this item? Okay, seeing no one coming forward, we'll close the public hearing. And is there a motion? Is there questions? It seems pretty straightforward. They need a bike shed. I was first thinking it was a bike shed for the kids to park their bikes so it wouldn't be in the rain, but no, it's for PE class. That's great. So if there'd be a motion, we can.
I move that we recommend approval of PCR 18-028.
Second.
Heather?
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Klee?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Scholler?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Okay, so we will now move on to the 3-part public hearing, PCR 18-025, 026, and 027. But before we start that,
Yes, Ms. Macbeth, as an employee of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, I have a conflict of interest in this matter, and I need to recuse myself from voting and from the discussion.
thank you. Okay, so Carolyn, thank you.
Madam Chair and members of Planning Commission, this is a request by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation to create a new private plaza on the site of the existing P3 parking lot in Merchant Square as shown on the overhead. The proposed plaza will be in the center of the existing block between Duke of Gloucester Street, North Boundary Street, Prince George Street, and North Henry Street. This request involves 3 cases. The first case is PCR 1825, is a staff request to clarify Section 21710C of the zoning ordinance by amending subparagraph C to require a special use permit for the removal of any parking spaces existing in any parking lots in the downtown parking district as of December 13th, 2018. The second request, PCR 1826, is to add a private plaza definition to the zoning ordinance and to add a private plaza with a special use permit in the downtown business district B1. The proposed definition of a private plaza is a multi-purpose area that allows flexibility of space within its boundaries to include planned and passive activities such as festivals, arts events, outdoor movies, stage, musical, or theatrical entertainment, which may also include fountains, benches, temporary installations including temporary stages, lighting and sound equipment, recreational facilities, outdoor furniture and seating areas, as well as outdoor seating area for restaurants and other eating establishments that surround the plaza. The third request, PCR 1827, is for a special use permit to remove 40 parking spaces from the P3 parking lot and a special use permit to construct a private plaza as shown on the conceptual elevations in the site plan that were included in my memo. You have the information you received, the applicant's narrative describing the plaza, the proposed uses such as art events, outdoor movies, stage musical, and theatrical entertainment and dining. They note their objective is to enhance an already vibrant, multi-use driven, flourishing Williamsburg Town Center that will be a magnet for residents and for visitors to enjoy. The conceptual design for the plaza includes a water feature, outdoor furniture, a video wall, and expansion of outdoor restaurant seating. I included in my memo the comp plan designation, zoning, and special use permit requirements. This site is located in an archaeological protection district, and an archaeological evaluation report has been prepared by Mark Costro, which was included with your packet. The report states a review of the documentary and archaeological evidence relating to the historical development of Block 23 indicates that the lot's 18th and 19th century development was predominantly near Duke of Gloucester Street and Prince George Streets, and for the most part is outside of Goodwin Square development. The development plans for Goodwin Square include very limited excavation and will require extensive land filling to raise the grade as much as 3 feet with the center of the development area to meet elevations along the area's perimeter. Therefore, any cultural resources within this area will be protected. To protect any resources from being destroyed, the report recommends that the CW Department of Archaeology to monitor any demolition and record the locations of any archaeological features that are exposed prior to construction of the plaza or for the Dunlap family cemetery area. The Architectural Review Board reviewed and conceptually approved the design of the plaza at their October 9th meeting, and I included the minutes from that meeting for your consideration. The Site Plan Review Committee reviewed the request at their October meeting. Committee members were in favor of the conversion and expressed concerns with trash removal and signage for parking located off north boundary. The applicant has revised the conceptual site plan to provide for trash containers adjacent to the plaza and will develop a sign package for approval with the final site plan if a special use permit is granted. It is the intent of the downtown parking district to establish special parking requirements appropriate to the unique character of the district. The district was established to allow property owners the flexibility to develop their property or to change a business use in their building without having to provide for additional parking. In the district, you must provide one off-street parking space for each residential unit, with senior housing requiring 1 space for every 2 units. No off-street parking is required for the removal of parking spaces for commercial. Staff is requesting this change to make it clear that the removal of any parking in the downtown district requires a special use permit approved by City Council, and is recommending that Section 21710C of the zoning ordinance be clarified to amend subparagraph C to require a special use permit for the removal of any parking spaces existing in any parking lots, and that's any parking lots in the downtown parking district as of December the 13th. This text change is necessary regardless of the outcome for Colonial Williamsburg's request for the P3 parking lot, because this clarification is needed for the removal of any parking spaces in the downtown parking district. For PCR 1826, this is a request to add a private plaza definition to the zoning ordinance, as I mentioned previously. For PCR 1827, the second request of the foundation is for a special use permit to remove 40 parking spaces from the P3 parking lot and a special use permit to construct a private plaza as shown on the conceptual elevations. In 2016, the city hired Walker Parking Consultants to perform a parking study of the downtown parking district. The study notes there are 4,326 parking spaces in the downtown parking district. 87% of the parking spaces are provided off-street. Of the 87% off-street spaces, 56% are in private lots. The spaces in higher demand are the 13% on-street parking spaces. For the study, the March counts were higher than the July counts, and during peak weekday conditions, 1,656 spaces were vacant in the study area. Demand is higher during weekdays than weekends, and more than 1,600 vacant parking spaces exist during peak time, and there are sufficient spaces in the district, the parking study reflects. There is a perception of limited parking in the district. The study cites that this is due to customers wanting to park at or close to the business they want to visit, and that short-term spaces are often being used by long-term users. Based on the parking study, the loss of 40 spaces in the P3 parking lot can be accommodated without detriment to overall parking downtown, because approximately 915 parking spaces are available in nearby parking lots, as shown in this overhead. And this overhead reflects P1, P2, P4, 5, and 6. The removal of these spaces can be absorbed by the adjacent lots, such as Prince George Parking Garage, or P6. Despite the common perception, overall the city has ample parking with a variety of parking options downtown within walking distance. As stated previously, the applicant proposes to construct a private park in the middle of the block. These properties are located in the Merchant Square, which was developed in the 1930s to relocate local businesses and services from the historic area. Merchant Square was named to the National Register of Historic Places in 2006. The Downtown Vibrancy Study cites the existing mix of land uses in the downtown core presents a further barrier to vibrancy. A need is cited for public open spaces that residents, students, and visitors can feel free to visit and relax. Similar areas of green spaces or plazas are necessary to ensure the downtown area is cohesively connected and people have access to a variety of open amenities. The Downtown Vibrancy Study recommended several green spaces downtown. One of the green spaces recommended was converting P3 parking lot into a premier plaza with such amenities as a fountain and gathering area for performance space. As stated previously, the applicant has revised their plan to provide 2 or 3 dumpster locations adjacent to the plaza based on comments from staff and the Site Plan Review Committee. Dumpster locations proposed are behind Schuster's and the Goodwin building, with the applicant investigating one inside the loading area behind the trellis. Concerns have been raised by individuals on fire access to the plaza. The conceptual plans provide fire access for the ladder truck, which has been reviewed and approved by the fire department. A video wall is proposed and is approximately 12 by 19 on a base with LED lights. The applicant proposes to use the video wall for movies, classes such as yoga, cooking shows, sporting events, and to advertise CW events throughout the day. Staff has reviewed the video wall, and it cannot be used for advertisement because it will then become a sign. In the city, electronic signs are not allowed. In the downtown sign district, for example, the maximum sign size allowed is 12 square feet and cannot be internally illuminated. Staff notes that the video wall and its continued use throughout the day is out of scale and character for the downtown area. The proposed project, with the exception of the video wall, is in harmony with the adopted comprehensive plan and the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. The proposed video wall is inconsistent with the community character of the downtown area and is not in scale with the district. The proposed use of a private plaza is in harmony with the character of adjacent properties and will not result in the destruction, loss, or damage of any feature determined to be of significant ecological, scenic, or historical importance. This project is designed and sited so that it will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of adjacent properties. Therefore, staff recommends for PCR 18-25 approval the text changes to clarify that the removal of any parking spaces in the downtown parking district requires a special use permit from City Council as outlined in the proposed ordinance. This will clarify in the future what is implied in Section 21709 and 21710 of the zoning ordinance. For PCR 1826, staff recommends approving the text change to define a private plaza and to allow a private plaza with a special use permit as outlined in the proposed ordinance. This gives the city the flexibility to evaluate each site and determine if a proposed plaza should be allowed. For PCR 18-27, staff recommends approval of the special use permit for the construction of the private plaza in the P3 parking as shown on the revised conceptual plans, subject to the following conditions. The video wall shall not be included with the approval of this application for the following reason. The size of the video wall is out of scale with surrounding buildings and is inconsistent with the community character of Merchant Square and the Merchant Square historic designation. Allowing video entertainment equipment to be temporarily installed for a period of not more than 3 consecutive days and not more than 15 times a year. This equipment cannot be used for advertisement. The use of permanent speakers in the plaza shall not be permitted because they are not in character with the district. At least 2 dumpster containers and required enclosures shall be installed as shown on the conceptual plan. A parking signage plan, bike racks, and ADA accessible seating locations being submitted and approved by Planning Commission as part of the final site plan if a special use permit is granted. To protect any resources from being destroyed, an archaeologist from the Colonial Williamsburg Department of Archaeology must be on site to monitor any demolition and record the locations of any archaeological features that are exposed prior to construction of the plaza or for the Dunlop family cemetery area. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Mr. Duncan, Vice President of Real Estate with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, is also present to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Carolyn?
Could you go into the trash a little bit more and where the canisters are going to be located, and will the tenants on Prince George Street be able to bring their trash there, or will they have to roll their cans down Prince George Street to a distant facility?
I can show you, if you look behind you, maybe the red, well, it came on for a few minutes. There's right below Schuster's there, right off of Boundary Street, is an area that's numbered for a dumpster location there. You see those parking spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3 or 4 or 5 of them right there.
Yes.
There's a dumpster location there, and then there's a proposed dumpster location in the indented section of the Goodwin building over on the left-hand side. Okay. Those are the 2 spaces that they know they can get. They're also looking at the number 5 spot behind the trellis where the old post office used to be and the roll-up doors are, to see if they can possibly locate one in there. They haven't determined that yet, so we're looking at a positive on 2 and maybe a 3rd location. And as far as the folks across the street, that's probably a question to ask Mr. Duncan if they can dump in that location.
Regarding handicap parking, I see 2 spaces. Are there more than that?
We've got some down on the other end of it also. That'll be looked at also by the building code as far as requirements for the building code requirement as part of the final site plan. But at this time, I think that meets the requirements. Code compliance did look at
handicap parking will be provided.
Handicap parking will be provided.
Will we be seeing a final site plan as a commission, or are we just working off of this conceptual?
Today, we're just looking at the conceptual site plan with the special use permit application. If the special use permit is approved by City Council, then the applicant would need to do the final site plan, and the final site plan would come back for a commission for your approval.
And if this is approved and goes through City Council, it will also go back before ARB with final drawings as
That's
well,
correct.
and site plan.
As part of the final site plan, the Architectural Review Board gets to approve all the architectural elements of the project, including the dumpster enclosure and all those things.
So I will open the public hearing, and if an applicant representative wants to come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'll answer the question on dumpsters. For the businesses on Prince George Street, they will be able to use the dumpsters as we'd be placing them in Goodwin Square. Okay. Those that take them to the current compactor dumpster would just be able to use the dumpster locations.
Great. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Ms. Murphy and other members of the city staff for the many man hours they committed to their review of the Goodwin Square project and in meetings with the Colonial Williamsburg team and our architects from Steam & Pease and VHB. And thank you also to the members of the Planning Commission, members of the ARB, the merchants in Merchant Square and downtown, and others who have provided advice, guidance, and feedback with respect to the project. I would also today like to address one aspect of the city's review with respect to the video wall. While the Goodwin Square project itself is very important to our planning as it relates to Merchant Square overall, including the future development of the Goodwin building, we consider the video wall to be an integral component of the project. A few clarifications about the video wall. The video wall is not proposed as a 24/7 or all-day commercial advertisement for Colonial Williamsburg. Thank you. Rather, the video wall will operate on a daily schedule with information about citywide events, wayfinding and background music, public offerings such as morning and afternoon outdoor yoga or exercise classes, movie nights that would eliminate the need to close Prince George Street or place an inflatable screen on Duke of Gloucester Street, streaming of live entertainment such as a symphony or Broadway musicals Under the Stars, and live streaming of sporting events and graduation ceremonies. Finally, with respect to the proposed size of the video wall, we are prepared to adjust the size and scale of the screen to make it more proportional to the buildings that surround the square, and to design shutters or doors to enclose the screen when not in use. I provided 3 new renderings to share, and I think we've got them on the screen now, if you can see those. This is a smaller version of the screen that was demonstrated on October the 17th, for those of you who may have come by to see that. The screen that was demonstrated in October was 12 feet wide by 9 feet tall. This screen would be 7 feet wide by 12 feet tall. So this image shows with the shutters closed or the walls closed when not in use. This is just another perspective of the proposed smaller video wall in use. And this gives you some perspective showing the size of the video wall that was demonstrated on October 17th compared with what we are proposing now. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I do have some speaker cards, and there are a lot of people, I think, who are going to want to speak, so I think we'll keep up the 5-minute timer rolling on this. And I'll call the speaker cards first, and then it will be open to who else wants to come up. So the first card is Stacy Kern-Schurer.
Hi, thank you. My name is Stacy Kern-Schurer. I live at 513 Newport Avenue. Thank you very much for allowing us to speak. I am here to speak in strong support of the analysis and recommendation by the city staff published in response to CW's request to create the square. I live downtown with my husband and my young child. The prospect of having this space, including the interactive fountain where children and the grandchildren of our community can play, and a space to enjoy as a community, is exciting and is most welcome. I often hear that city leaders rightfully want to attract young families to the downtown area, either as residents or as visitors, and creating spaces like the one proposed here is the way to make that happen. There are many of us young families that live here and have been hoping for Williamsburg to catch up with other towns and cities and create a space like the one proposed. I know that my family is not unique insofar as whenever we go on a trip or on a vacation, we look for the splash pad in which our child could play. We Google it from our hotel room and we find it. We find the free outdoor space where we can grab a bite or a treat or pack a picnic and enjoy. Big cities, small towns, we've been to one in Eastwood, Kentucky, have figured out how to create a space like this and to do so successfully. So I'm pretty sure that Williamsburg can figure this out as well. The space recommended in the staff report would be used by tourists and locals alike. Businesses around this space will benefit. I would hope that the Blue Talon, Blackbird Bakery, and Baskin-Robbins would be able to extend their outdoor spaces, which are currently woeful. On a pretty day, we don't go to Blue Talon because we don't want to eat in a parking lot. Parents don't want to eat or hang out with their children in a parking lot for obvious reasons. But with the creation of this space, eating outside at Blue Talon, grabbing an ice cream cone at Baskin-Robbins or a scone at Blackbird Bakery, and sitting outside becomes the perfect thing to do with your family. The staff report makes clear that there is not a dearth of parking in the downtown area. There are hundreds of empty spots, even at peak times. Living down here, I see this evidence daily. However, I do understand, and I fully support the need to ensure that we have appropriate number of ADA compliant spaces for those who have ADA decals, and I support and encourage any efforts to preserve those spaces as needed. The one aspect of CW's proposal that I do not support is the screen. It's pretty atrocious. I was pleased to read the staff recommendation against the screen approval. I could not agree more. It would undo all the potential good that I just mentioned about the space. I would not take my kid to get an ice cream cone at a community space with a big screen showing something. As I suspect most families do, we get outside to get away from screens. A movable screen that might be brought in for special events is one thing, but a giant screen that is more permanent in nature is something else entirely, and I don't support it. Obviously, I hadn't seen what he just said before I wrote my comments, and so I guess I could look at that, but I think pretty anti-screen outdoor, pretty much in general here. That's why we go outside. I would like to add, too, that this is a tough time of day for a big constituency that would benefit for this space, and that's parents. Many parents are working right now and not able to get out of the office to get here. I drew the straw. Other parents are picking kids up from school right now or shuttling to after-school activities. In fact, I talked just this morning to a half a dozen other parents who aren't able to come this afternoon, but who are supportive of the proposal, as I have discussed. I hope that their perspective would be heard, and I hope that you understand why they may be emailing instead of here speaking before you today for those reasons. So in sum, I please approve the proposal and move it forward, but without the video wall, as stated in the staff recommendation in the memo dated November 8th to the Planning Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My next card is from J. Mott Robertson.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm Mott Robertson, native Virginian from Lynchburg, moved down here in 2008. In full disclosure, I live in James City County in Kings Mill. I do not own property or have investment in the various institutions and businesses involved in Merchant Square. I thank the Planning Commission for all the work it has done, and also the architectural review, which was quite historic, and the Economic Development Authority for the time that they spend in attracting new businesses to Williamsburg. I speak in opposition to this proposal. First off, I'd like to know whose idea it was. Was it CW's idea? Or was it something that just generated out of the Williamsburg Development Authority? Or was it something being promoted by the Downtown Restaurant Group, David Everett's group, and the 4 restaurants that they have down here? The second statement, another park or green space is really not needed. There are plenty of parks and green spaces in Colonial Williamsburg. There are other areas that could be used. A water area or pool for children is going to be a liability for injuries and a site for possible waterborne infections, and it is a significant liability. If you want to take your child to go to a swimming pool, go to your local residence pools. The people coming to visit Williamsburg can use the hotel pools, and if you're really into it, you can go to Great Wolf Lodge or you can go to Water Country. You don't have to have a pool downtown. The P3 parking area needs more. The P3 parking is needed more than the park or green space. It will not help the this conversion to the plaza or square will not help the merchants who sell products or services. The only merchants that will be helped are the restaurant owners and those who sell food products. But the people who sell other items, clothing items, decorative items, they will not be helped by the conversion of necessary parking into an unnecessary park. Older persons will also be affected by the closing of this parking area, and particularly handicapped people. I heard one clerk in one of the buildings, in one of the merchants that I toured and talked to, say that perhaps make all of the parking in that P3 lot handicapped. Well, that's 48 handicapped spaces. That's probably more than they need, but it was an interesting concept. Right now on the plan, there are only 4 handicapped spaces listed. Some of them are covered over by the trees that are on there. Those are 4, that is less than the number of handicapped spaces that are currently in the P3 lot. And there is an incorrect parking space number on the CW submission letters. They indicated that there were a number of parking, 1,080 some parking spaces available in the P1 and P6 lots. That is incorrect. If you add up the numbers in those lots, they misspoke by about 400 and some spaces. And that's on their letter that came from Mr. Duncan. The first letter was in September, and he sent a subsequent letter in October. That's in your packet that you will have gotten today. This will be a seasonal and limited use park. In spring and summer, yes, it may be really great. In hot days in July and August, I'm not sure a lot of people are going to be sitting outside sweltering while they drink a nice glass of wine from the Blue Tower. It's even less usable in fall and winter on a daily basis now. I'm talking on a daily basis. Who wants to have an alfresco dining outside the Blue Talon when it's raining and cold in November? And who wants to eat a Baskin and Robbins ice cream cone in February sitting outside? Yes, they'd be inside, but if you close off the parking, it takes up space. There are a number of comment letters in your package. There are several in support. One is by David Treacherous, who's on the WDA board. He is, though, interestingly, opposed to the screen, so that's good. There's a support letter from Andrew Voss of the Amber Ox and Precarious Beer. It's a great place. We've had nice events there with the St. Andrews Society at the Amber Ox. And nice that we are repurposing Seasons Restaurant.
Your time is up, if you could wrap up.
I'm just getting started.
Well, then maybe we've been in the red for you for almost a minute already, so maybe if you could wrap that up.
All right, I'll try to
talk.
Okay, I'll try to get 2 other points. The effect on the Goodwin building, sale and development. We have not seen the plans. It was listed in Mr. Duncan's presentation that there were going to be some plans about how CW was going to use that building, and they hope to have them in October. Haven't seen the plans. If I was renting an apartment, say, in that building, if it was converted to apartments, I wouldn't want the dumpster located outside the main door, and that's where one of the 2 dumpsters is located. And the noise from outdoor activities and various events that would go on in the current proposed park would deter me from being an apartment rentor or an apartment purchaser.
Okay, there's a lot of people who want to speak, so I think that we need to let other people speak, and then we can have you come back up again once people have spoken.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, my next speaker's card is William Geib. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm William Geib, a retired director of store development and construction for a major retailer of over 6,500 stores. In that capacity, I have gained extensive knowledge and understanding of the parameters that impact a successful store. As proposed, I strongly believe that the Goodwin Square project would be a major miscalculation. In my years of retail store development responsibilities for multiple retailers, my organization systematically studied components of successful store performance. We found that convenient access with plenty of adjacent parking is the greatest driver of store success. One of the major mistakes that planners frequently make is to underestimate the effect of convenience on the shopping public. Merchants located near the proposed Goodwin Square project will suffer a loss of sales if the 48 parking spaces are lost. The bakery, peanut shop, ice cream store, and the farmer's market are more will be impacted by the loss of convenience and the extra competition for parking in nearby lots. Mr. Duncan and Colonial Williamsburg seem to underestimate the effect upon visits, especially by locals, if parking in the 4 lots surrounding Merchant Square is restricted. There's a science to measuring the potential effects on retail in Merchant Square. There's much to consider, like what is the average count of vehicles by hour, by day, where do the visitors go, where do they shop, how much of the dollar spent per visit, distance traveled, age of the visitors, and more. But for now, I'll stick with the 48 parking spaces. Consider the 48 spaces in question. Mr. Duncan must know better than I do and understand the turnover for these spaces, but for today's example, I will assume a reasonable 20-minute cycle as a turnover. In an 8-hour shopping cycle, that would equate to 1,152 visits. All merchants in the square will feel the effects of the loss of these parking spaces. If the parking is not convenient, customers will find alternate sources for their bread, ice cream, restaurants, and clothing. On every Saturday's farmer's market, one sees cars snaking around and around the parking lot searching for a space. The pay lot is often full. The abandonment of these 48 spaces will result in 150 to 400 visits on a given Saturday morning and can even lead to the shopper's perception that it is too hard to find a place to park and therefore a slow decline in visits. Examples of the failure to understand this effect of convenience are all around the greater Williamsburg area. Reflect on the struggles of Marquee Shopping Center and the Williamsburg Market Center on Moortown Road. These 2 shopping centers are handicapped by the failure of developers to understand the impediment of choke points, such as an interstate highway or railroad tracks. Rooftops are located south of I-64, and consumers perceive that these barriers are an inconvenience. No better example is the demise of the U-Crop store in the Williamsburg Market Center versus the new Harris Teeter in Lightfoot. These 2 locations are less than a mile apart and are comparable in shopping experience. Yet, the Harris Teeter is a significant success. The U-Crop's closed. Another example is Saxby's, a national successful franchise located in the new restaurant in Williamsburg Crossing, and it failed in less than a year because of inconvenient access to 199. Shopping visits are driven by convenient access and adjacent parking. A last word writer suggested an excellent idea. Close off the lot for a month. Right now, in the busy Christmas season, put a TV, benches, some Christmas trees in the proposed Goodwin Square. Let's see what happens. Further, would CW amend the leases for the adjacent retailers that should they be affected by loss in sales due to this project? Could CW dare to do these 2 things? If not, then why would this board approve their proposal?
Okay, you've gone through your time as well.
Okay. Thank you then this evening.
Thank you. Okay, my next speaker card is Amy Quark.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and so quickly. I'm here to speak for young families. There are a lot of young families in Williamsburg. We think of ourselves as a retirement community, and I have a whole neighborhood full of retired neighbors, and we love them to death. But there's also lots of young families that are excited to be in Williamsburg, that want to be part of the Williamsburg community. And I think sometimes we're a group of folks whose priorities aren't always kind of at the top of the agenda. And certainly, you might have noticed I came in with my 2 small children. I think this was a very difficult time for parents who are working and having children at early release to come and speak. That said, I am extremely excited about this plan for the new park. I think that it is a fabulous idea. I'm really appreciative of the due diligence that was done to ensure that parking is not an issue. I think that it's been made very clear that there are lots of available parking spots downtown, and I thank everyone for doing the research to demonstrate that. I think that this space will make a huge difference in making Colonial Williamsburg and Merchant Square a family-friendly place to be. Families are constantly looking for pleasant, easy spaces to have their kids run around, to enjoy themselves, that are stress-free, and this is exactly what we need. There are no splash pads or play fountains within Williamsburg, James City County, outside of Busch Gardens, which of course is a steep price to pay. If you go into Busch Gardens, you'll see that it is one of the most popular places for children to play. And so the idea that this would be downtown Williamsburg means that it's going to be a huge draw for local families. Baskin-Robbins alone is going to make a killing here. And I think that the other businesses nearby are going to find that this is a huge boost. Families that think about Colonial Williamsburg as a place that, just doesn't have that much for small children, if you're not actually, a tourist going into all the buildings, are going to find people will come here. They'll say, hey, we can go down and have our Baskin-Robbins and, have dinner at the Blue Talon and enjoy the play fountain instead of going to Kidsburg. It's going to provide this new and very competitive location. We don't have anything else like it here. I think this is also going to be fantastic for tourists. A lot of tourists go to Colonial Williamsburg, they have their kids, they do the Colonial Williamsburg routine, and then they retreat back to their hotels, or they go down to Richmond Road. If you want to keep those tourists in the downtown area, in Merchant Square for longer, this is a fantastic plan. There's nothing better than, walking the great distances for young children around Colonial Williamsburg, and they're tired at the end of it, and then you say, hey, let's go and splash around in the water and have some ice cream. And then they're there, and then they say, well, look, here's Blue Talon, there's this nice, outdoor eating space, and they stay there instead of going to some of the restaurants elsewhere in the city and county. So if downtown vibrancy is something we want to pursue, I think this is a really great plan. And I do think that people underestimate how much of the year this is going to be, a real draw. I'm sure there are, chilly days in, November, December, January, where you might not have hordes of people out there. It will be smaller groups of people that will use it. But you're talking about 9 or 10 months of the year where this is going to be something that families are going to consistently enjoy. So I think that in terms of drawing people down to downtown during that huge chunk of the year, this is a fantastic plan. So I want to thank everyone again for doing all the work on this, and I hope you realize that the few young families that were able to come today, we certainly represent a lot more families that weren't able to make it to the forum at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. My next speaker card is Rachel Treacherous.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am thrilled to see that the City of Williamsburg is considering this kind of gathering space, and I would love to see more investments like this. One of the things that I've come to appreciate most about Williamsburg since moving down here from DC with my husband and now our young daughter 5.5 years ago is the opportunity for community. And it doesn't take me 30 minutes to drive in the car to go see a friend. And I've been able to spend time building that community. And I think one thing we can improve in Williamsburg is having more gathering places and destination places to build that feeling of community that I've so appreciated here. And this is exactly the type of thing that I would think would improve that. There's a group of about 10 or 12 moms that rotating, we come and we about once a week walk down in Colonial Williamsburg. And as has been mentioned, this is a hard time for a lot of them to make it, but I can tell you that I speak on their behalf when I say this is exactly the kind of thing that we are looking for. A place to be outside, a place to gather, a place for kids to be able to run around, a place to talk and to build community, to have that destination. And I think that that would be something that locals could appreciate, as well as tourists. A couple of things people have mentioned: handicap parking, a drop-off zone. I fully support that and understand the need for that. And also appreciate the existence of parking in the area that I don't see being used to its full potential, and that could accommodate other people coming to this area and finding a place to meet here. Also, the screen is a concern. I did go to the testing in the parking lot the other day, and the quality was lovely. Too lovely, actually, is my concern. I mentioned I have a daughter, and like the first speaker said, I don't come outside to fight the battle of screen time, and I would hate to see this opportunity to be outside, to gather with friends, just have a distraction of a giant screen, even if it's a static image of a calendar. Just the attraction that is to young children is not what I'm looking for, and I think, as your recommendation, doesn't meet the feel of the city and of the area. So I would like to see restrictions around that. I think having dedicated events, so movies or sporting events or streaming graduation, I think, again, that would enhance the ability of this spot to accommodate gathering and to accommodate community, but I don't think it being there permanently is going to address that. And my husband, David Trichler, who was quoted earlier, obviously stands in support of that, but also stands in support of this green space. And again, having an opportunity to gather as a community and have these destinations in order to continue to build that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, my next speaker card, David Clemens.
Thank you for the time to speak today. I do not have prepared remarks. I'm just one who kind of walked in and listened and said, geez, I think I got a couple things I'd like to say. So let me just start with who I am. Again, I'm David Clemens. I've had the privilege of living in Williamsburg for 20 years, so I'm not native to this area, but we chose to live here in Williamsburg primarily because of everything to do with the city, James City County, but really at CW in particular, that attracted both my wife and I to move from Connecticut here to Williamsburg and also to choose to raise our family here. We have two kids, a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. I did not think about the value of this park for them until I heard a couple comments of saying that this is something that'd be very impressive for kids. And in fairness, as a parent, to have a splash pad there I think would be something pretty cool. I know my daughter would absolutely love it. And if you've ever seen a young girl just take a break from the middle of her day while on vacation and just dance around and listen to some music, that is something that is absolutely worth embracing. So I think the idea of being pro-kid is a pretty cool idea, and I do like that. My background is biology. I was in ecology concentration. So anything to do with trees and open space to me is a very good idea, and I do embrace that. I like it. I like the architectural design. It goes without saying that I think I'm pretty much in favor of this idea. I also happen to be the branch manager of Morgan Stanley, so I'm one of those shops right there on the bottom. We've looked at it across our clients, we looked at it across the people who work in our shop, kind of came to the general idea that for us, this is really no financial impact. Our revenue is not predicated on whether or not there's parking immediately in front of our building. So I'm neutral on that stance. I will say this, I have a lot of respect for the rest of the folks who do operate their business there. I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. But we do understand enough about economic cycles that good businesses will adjust. I don't have any doubt that if they run their business well and we're willing to support them, then I think they will be just fine. I do have a great deal of faith and optimism about that. So one thing I will say, that if this committee does decide, Planning Commission decides to go ahead and vote in favor of this, it's absolutely incumbent upon us as a community to support the idea, if nothing else, to make sure that the merchants don't have their livelihood compromised in any way. That's something that's just important. That's more of a message to the community. We go this path. If that's the decision, then we go this path and we go together. The one concern that we've had has to do with some of the modifications to the parking. I'm glad to see that it's not all handicap. I don't know enough about ADA regulations to comment on however many we should have or where they should be. I will trust the architects and the design to some extent to do that. What I do ask, and I'm glad to see this, is that for our business, it's important to have some type of drop-off where a client may stop by for just a few minutes. To park in a parking garage, walk across, include crossing a street, is an inconvenience to them. It is not our preference to inconvenience people if we can. Again, a 5-10 minute drop-off is good. Again, leave it to the architects to make a decision on whether or not a UPS truck can get in there or not. I did ask the architects when I heard this earlier where the drones will land. Sounds like a sarcastic comment maybe, but if you think about it, the design is really more, you can't just look at this in a 5-year picture or where were things 2 years ago. You got to look at this in a 5 to 10 to 15-year progression. What do urban areas look like? Newtown was a cool idea 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Is it contemporary today? Is it contemporary 15 to 20 years from now? And I would suggest that Merchant Square has always been an area since it was first incepted 80 years ago as a progressive idea. There weren't many movie theaters when the Kimball Theater was built in this country. And that is a tradition that I think Merchant Square has kind of forgotten, that Merchant Square is a progressive place as far as new ideas. So to think about what an urban area would look like 20 years from now, I think is something that you should consider in all this. The last thing, and this may be a topic that's beyond this particular conversation, and it's probably the overarching concern that we have is the parking garage itself. How will that function? How will the different readers that they're proposing function that? This is something that's important to us, and again, it's for the people in our community. One thing that we do is we validate parking for the people who come work for us. We're happy to serve our clients and our customers. What we do is validate the parking, and this is a service that we provide for them. We would not want to see that downgraded in any way with the parking, so if you could consider what is the experience in the parking to this particular facility, that whole stretch, think of it in its totality. That's something that's beyond it. So whatever's to the left of this diagram going out to the parking lot and area is something that also needs to be considered. Personally, I'm in full support of this idea. I do have one last comment on the screen. Modest is cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker, David Ralston.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity to voice our opinion. And I hate to go against the moms of Williamsburg and James City County, but there's really not that many kids that live within walking distance of that play fountain. And how many are going to put their kids in bathing suits and pack them into the car and try to find a parking place near that plaza to let their kids play in the fountain realistically? But the main point I want to make is based on what's the obligations of the Planning Commission regarding this decision, and clearly they are to look at and follow the economic development plan and the goals and initiatives of the city, and how does this relate to those. And it's my ambition to convince the Planning Commission that this project actually goes against the stated goals of the city, most notably Goal 1A regarding parking and Goal 2D regarding support of existing businesses. And furthermore, if what is the number of articles and letters to the editor and last word in the Virginia Gazette are any indication, there's a very strong majority in the broader community that prefer parking to additional green space and gathering space in an area that is abundant in those green spaces. Oddly, the 2018 National Citizen Survey asked about public transportation, carpooling, and bicycling, but did not question parking. 2014 was the last year that adequate public parking was included in the National Citizen Survey. And at 49%, it was the lowest rated city service question in the survey. Going back to 2008, the adequacy of public parking never ranked above 50% with the loss of parking on the north side of the 400 and 500 blocks of Prince George, and with restriping Richmond Road, free public parking has already been reduced by about 40 places since then. The 2016 parking lot study referenced quite clearly says that the overall parking system adequately supports peak parking conditions. But it also notes that hotspots do exist on some lots for some parking types. These localized shortages may give parkers the perception of inadequate parking in the downtown, despite plentiful parking within a block or two. Specifically, the lots and on-street spaces closest to Merchant Square were observed to experience occupancy rates above 85% of capacity, while the P6 lot and the parking garage had a surplus of spaces. They look at the future and see approximately a 1% year growth for increasing demand on parking. And regarding the future, they say while most blocks are expected to have adequate supply to support future demand, parking hotspots are expected. This is particularly true in the Merchant Square area. To our Merchant Square customers, and I represent my daughter's store, the Shoe Attic, which is right on the P3 parking lot, perception is reality. Our most frequent complaint from customers is lack of convenient parking. Maybe they're spoiled, but the reality is that they do not want to park in a gravel lot 2 blocks away or deal with paid parking hassle. This plan ignores the reality that a very high percentage of Merchant Square customers are in fact local, over 50% at our store. And I have to note that the loss of 40 or 42 or however many parking spots in P3 is planned to be followed by the loss of another 69 spots in P5. Whatever the attraction is for walkable urbanism, as stated in our economic development plan, I think will be negated by the lack of convenient parking. Mr. Duncan spoke earlier, and he quite rightly pointed out that there's over 4,300 spaces with low occupancy rates. That's very true, but again, 2,400 of those spaces are private, another 650 are less convenient paid lots. Using the data from that same report, I count 367 free spaces with at least 1 hour limit between Scotland and Ireland and Armistead. That is the hotspot. The P3 plan will eliminate 11%, and the P5 plan will take another 19%. Convenient parking is already a known problem in that area and forecast to get worse. The city has recognized the problem for years. If there is plenty of parking, why has the city imposed neighborhood parking restrictions and time limits on street parking all around Merchant Square? Losing 30% of the most convenient parking will seriously harm many Merchant Square businesses and frustrate both locals and visitors. They will go elsewhere.
I thank you. Your time is up.
Just let me wrap up with a little bit of a brief summary. Just to me, the incongruity of replacing what is already scarce, convenient parking, with more of what we already have in abundance, walkable urbanism, is puzzling and more than a little suspicious. Like one other speaker, I'd like to know who benefits. It's not the Merchant Square merchants, that's for sure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Tom Gilman.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Gilman, 601 Richmond Road. Thank you, commissioners, for your volunteerism. Some of you know me. I've spent 8 years on the Economic Development Authority, and we have spoken about this concept privately and within the EDA for many, many years. And so I'm going to skew the data here. I'm over 60, and I stand in strong favor of this proposal. I brought some articles with me. One is from Dallas. This is a 2016 article, and it's called City Parks Instead of Parking Lots. So Dallas convened public input. They were called envisioning sessions with the public. And they decided that, or they found out, that people missed water, nature, structure, and a place for social connectivity in the downtown area. So now it's written into their master plan. They're converting 4 parking lots into parks. And this is not just happening in Dallas, it's happening around the world. The U.S., we're famous for our parking lots. My goodness. Here's an article from The Guardian, and as you know, The Guardian's a London-based publication, but the article goes all over. It talks about Canada, it talks about the U.S., it talks about many places in Europe that are strongly going against parking lots. And just to quote it, says, the U.S. has long been the world leader in building parking spaces. During the mid-20th century, city zoning codes began to include requirements and quotas for most developments to include parking spaces. The supply skyrocketed. A 2011 study by the University of California estimated there are upwards of 800 million parking spaces in the U.S., covering about 25,000 square miles of land. I'm going to quote here in the article Michael Kudrowski. He's a global research manager for the Institution of Transportation and Development Policy. And quote, he says, as parking regulations were put into zoning codes, most of the downtowns in many cities were just completely decimated. What cities got, in effect, was great parking, but nobody goes to a city because it has great parking. People go places because of content. People don't pack the sidewalks of Georgetown because it has great parking. People pack the sidewalks of Georgetown because it has great content. People are discovering this. So the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. And also there's the green aspect of it. We used to joke that P3, that people just constantly circled it, waiting for that free parking spot. And we said that there must be a hole in the ozone layer named P3. And, and that was a joke. But then I found in this article, which I just printed today, that wasn't just foolishness on our part. There's a guy named Donald Shoup. He's a distinguished research professor of urban planning at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. He wrote a book. You know what it's called? It's called The High Cost of Free Parking. He explains that free or parking contributes to traffic congestion in a major way. A study in the neighborhood near UCLA's campus showed that drivers cruise the area looking for parking for an average of 3.3 minutes. That sounds about right. Based upon the number of parking spaces there, that adds up to about 950,000 extra miles traveled over the course of the year, burning 47,000 gallons of gasoline and emitting 730 tons of carbon dioxide. So obviously that's a different scale than Williamsburg. The point is there. We are becoming a greener society. We have alternate methods of transportation, whether it's pedestrian or bicycling. But pedestrian foot traffic is an economic engine, and converting an ugly parking lot to a beautiful park just makes sense to me. And there's a lot of data to back that up. If I have a scale here, and on one side of the scale I put how many times people said, what a beautiful parking lot, versus people who said, what a beautiful park, it would be imbalanced. So I strongly support this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, my next card is David Everett.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm David Everett. I run several businesses that would be affected by Goodwin Square, the Bluetown Bistro, and Blackbird Bakery specifically, but also the Trellis, which owns Blackbird Bakery, and Dog Street Pub and the Bottle Shop. And I'm strongly in favor of the proposal for many reasons. I think the vibrancy is important to the community, and we do so much for the community and try to foster that sort of thing downtown and around Williamsburg. I think this is the perfect kind of venue for that. The parking situation, I think, is greatly a perception, because there is parking, and I think that people believe that there isn't parking and it's hard to find or it's hard to get to or you have to pay for it. So I think we do have a perception problem in terms of that. When you look at that lot, that's a 1-hour parking lot. It doesn't really help me in the restaurant business. After 6 o'clock, you can park there, and then that becomes very finite, you can fill it up with diners, quickly and be done with it. But during the daytime, it's not enough time to come in and have lunch. It's not come in and shop somewhere quickly. Perhaps you could, go to Reggie's or something and go quickly. I don't really know, but I find that to be kind of worrisome that is the driving catalyst behind that. I also think that the screen is a good idea. I understand the scale of it. I understand scaling it down. We've been running for the last, I believe, 6 years, movies on Prince George Street with a giant blow-up screen, and it's a thing that the kids actually love, So the mother comments about, not going out there for media, I certainly, I'm sensitive to that. I understand it, but I also think the benefit of having that screen and be able to do educational things or movies or just fun things, the old drive-in theater is gone, and sort of people like that sort of concept. So I'm in favor, that they have something there, doors on it, whatever. I mean, that's certainly an architectural deal. But when I was negotiating my leases back as early as 2003, I was presented with Goodwin Square. It wasn't called Goodwin Square at the time, by the foundation, just letting me know that this is an area that's going to be, we want to develop into a park. So we've been aware of it our entire existence down with businesses in the Merchant Square area. So it wasn't something that was when they finally, every few years it would come up again and there'd be some sort of rendition of it or whatever, and then it became very serious. We're very excited by that. Obviously, we're a restaurant group, and we stand to benefit from that. But I think that the longer that you can keep people down in the area, the more the businesses benefit from that. If they can stay down there longer to shop, and they can dine, and they can go to the park, and the kids can take a break or what have you, or if you're elderly, I think the elderly have equal concern for us as a restaurant as it does for the youth. I think that if you turn away from one, you turn away from the other. The future is kids, young families to come down and experience Williamsburg and come back, and then it's obviously for the elderly to be able to get down there and experience it as well. But to be able to take a break or enjoy the park, I think would be very beneficial while they're out shopping. Also, with the foundation moving the visitor center close by to with the new museums in the next, I guess, 24 months or so, I think it's going to have a large impact on the square, and I think this is just the kind of thing that would be necessary for that, and also provide some other forms of transportation and parking that's not available to them now that could bring them literally door to door. But again, I think the parking thing becomes more of a perception, but than it is reality. You sort of talk yourselves into the negative. But I would have to agree with Tom Gilman in terms of, when was the last time you heard about someone brag about how great the parking is in their city and not how great the services that they offer. So we're strongly in support of all of it, and thanks for the time.
Next speaker, Sandra Anderson.
Sandra Anderson, 201 Woburn. I don't see this as an either or. I like both of them equally. Why not keep the parking lot and work this beautiful park into the landscape of the museum, which they're renovating? That's all I have to say.
Ralph Youngs.
Afternoon. My name is Ralph Youngs, and I own the Baskin-Robbins. We've heard a little bit about our store this afternoon, which is great. We've owned the business for 20 years now, and the location's been there for 50. We are really excited about the Goodwin Plaza. We think it's going to be a really neat addition to the Merchant Square and to the city in general. We believe that it would benefit both the merchants on Merchant Square and the residents of the city. The plaza would welcome people off of Duke of Gloucester Street and allow them to visit all the shops on Prince George Street and more of Merchant Square. And I think it would increase, as the residential housing increases throughout the city, the plaza in the middle of the downtown Williamsburg would help the city in general. It would serve as a focal point for the downtown. It could have multiple uses for the city as an outdoor living area for the entire community, a place that we could have festivals, gathering places, concerts. Again, I strongly are in favor and enthusiastically endorse the Goodwin Plaza.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have any more speaker cards. If anyone else would like to come forward, state your name and address. If no one else is coming forward, please come to the microphone, yes. The 5-minute timer is still operational, by the way.
I'll take less than a minute, I suspect. First, in concluding, what I didn't get to say this earlier is it appears that many deciders are starry-eyed at the idea of a nice park, but lack the understanding of the potential loss of visits to Market Square, the loss of Merchant Square, and the loss of sales tax revenue to the city, especially by locals like myself that support the colonial Williamsburg experience but demand a convenient access to those services. There was a comment by a previous person about the elderly. I'm one of the elderly. With a knee replacement, my wife has a hip replacement, and we won't walk several blocks to go to these restaurants or go to these stores. But we are part of the demographics that have the spendable income. Another comment about in the presentation by staff that there is a perception that there isn't enough parking. We all have to recall the perception is reality. This board can't change that perception. Another comment, lived in Dallas. Dallas example, Dallas has a crisis in downtown non-business activities. And that was the driver for that study. People don't live downtown, don't participate. Restaurants are dead downtown, there's no bars or anything else. Once the businesses close at 5, everybody goes home. And the comment, which is important, was people go downtown for content. We come here for the content of convenient shopping, conveniently go and participate in the activities of Colonial Williamsburg, which is a strong reason to keep these parking spaces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one other thing I didn't finish up with. I left pictures of the block that's on the other side of Henry Street, the space that's in front of the William and Mary bookstore and the Bruton Parish gift shop. This would be a great place to take that plan and make a park there. It's unused except for right now. The skating rink is set up. Skating rink is actually beyond probably the length of that park. So that would be another site that could be used that currently is not being used for anything other than farmers market. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have not spoken yet, so please come forward.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Theodore Hiller, and I live in Windsor, Meade, in James City County, so I'm one of the old people. What we constantly hear from Colonial Williamsburg is a need for financial assistance. I belong to the Raleigh Tavern Society Apollo Room, so I myself do contribute to Colonial Williamsburg. It seems to me that money could be spent in better places than spending a significant amount of money in this design. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. One last comment, and I should have mentioned it earlier, and it probably doesn't need to be mentioned because I'm sure you're already considering it, but Colonial Williamsburg Foundation is a great steward of our area. They're the #1 economic engine, arguably, in our area. So this isn't turning a parking lot over to someone who's thinly funded and might stop making this park look beautiful in a couple years. We're talking about Colonial Williamsburg. They are a great steward to our community. So when you think about, somebody mentioned the 15, 20-year vision, what's it going to look like? We're talking about Colonial Williamsburg. It's going to look beautiful. I mean, that's kind of what they do. This is not an experiment. There's a lot of data that supports conversion of places like this, and I can't think of a better steward for it than Colonial Williamsburg.
Sarah?
Thank you. My name is Sarah Bland. I've lived here since 1983. My husband Bob has been here. He graduated from William & Mary in '66 and has been here, except for 2 years ever since then. So we're longtime residents. We raised our 3 girls here. They're all young adults now. I have two points. We love Colonial Williamsburg. I look at all of Colonial Williamsburg as being a park. It's all green space. And we spent many, many hours in Colonial Williamsburg playing. We did not need a specially designated park area with any kind of a fountain or any kind of a splash pad. All of CW is a park. It is all beautiful. I'm one of these people that looks for convenience in parking, and there have been many times when I could not find a parking place, and so I left. And I think if Colonial Williamsburg converts this parking lot into a park, that I personally believe they will lose business. I know if I can't find a place to park, I'll leave and go somewhere else. But I particularly think about parking at night. When people come into town to go to Baskin-Robbins or go to any of the restaurants, that's a very convenient parking because after, 6 o'clock, the parking is unlimited, the time. And again, there have been times when we have come in to go to Baskin-Robbins and you couldn't find a place on the street to park. You can no longer park behind SunTrust Bank, and so you generally park in this P3 parking lot. And then the issue of handicap parking. There are many, many people who have limited mobility but who do not have handicap parking passes. And so I would also be very concerned about parking for those folks if this lot is closed, particularly in the evenings. Thank you.
I think I saw your hand up, yes, please.
Again, looking at this from the perspective of your responsibility to be responsive to the goals and initiatives and outcomes for the city, a little meat on the bones regarding Goal 1A, which is to maintain downtown vibrancy. And language in the objectives is to explore the conversion of P3 parking lot to a special event space to include consideration of maintaining the parking lot field while accommodating infrastructure and design for temporary special event use. I strongly suggest that you declare victory. You've met that goal of the objectives, and allow us to continue the utilization of those hotspot parking places and to not replace what is in such short supply with more of what is already in great abundance up and down Colonial Williamsburg. It is a park. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to come forward and speak to the commission? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Anyone like to go first? Or I have some questions for Carolyn for any general discussion of some things that were said. I guess a couple of speakers spoke to, I think, articles that were in the paper, but were referencing numbers that, for me, are associated with the downtown parking study. That the number of the parking spaces from the parking study were inaccurate, and also a loss of parking in P5. Can you speak to the numbers that are included in our packet as to where they came from and all that?
These numbers that are on the screen are those that were shown in the parking study. That's where I got them from.
And the parking study was done by an outside consultant.
Yes,
right?
by Walker Parking Consultants. So this screen shows the amount of parking space, and of course P3 has 48, and they're proposing to go down to 40. P1 is 356. I also can tell you that I asked the police department about the use of the Prince George Street parking garage, and they said back to me that an average day about 160 cars use the parking garage. It's used more on the weekends with about 300. So if you think about all day long with 354 parking spaces or 56 parking spaces, 160 during the week and 300 on weekends just for that parking garage. You've got P2 with the spaces on there. You've got P4, P5, and P6. Of course, P6 has the most spaces, with the other ones smaller in number, and I'll have to look at my memo to see them because these old eyes can't read it from this distance.
Well, I mean, P5 is currently listed as having 69 spots, and one of the speakers said that there's a proposal of loss of parking in P5. Is that something that we're aware of at the city
I'm not
level?
aware of any loss.
Okay.
Parking in P5.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So, discussion. Who would like to start?
I don't mind jumping in. I think it's somewhat of a interesting twist to have a developer want to get rid of parking to add green space. That's not something that I'm used to hearing. But I look at it not just as adding green space, I think of it as adding an attraction. You're expanding the attraction of Colonial Williamsburg and adding another element to it. And in general, it's, in my mind, the expansion of a business by adding the attraction, expanding it. And so while there will be people who will have to walk a little bit further, in some cases, there will be people who will now have a new attraction that's closer to the parking deck, the parking garage. So that's one of the interesting things that I have on my mind. I wonder, back when Colonial Williamsburg was done, how many people turned out and complained about the loss of parking on Duke of Gloucester Street? Because we have a real gem now without parking on Duke of Gloucester Street. I know as we've been adding bike lanes and such throughout the community and taking away some parking on Prince George Street several years ago, there was parking on both sides of Prince George Street. And I think probably many people look at it now and say, wow, we've got something better now than we had when we had cars lining both sides of the street. It's certainly more attraction. For me, I've lived in Williamsburg my entire life. Colonial Williamsburg and the college was my playground. I grew up on Harrison Avenue, and the time that I spent walking around Colonial Williamsburg and the college and riding my bike around and hanging out with my friends helped instill a great connectivity to me for Colonial Williamsburg and my community. And so I see this as an opportunity for families to really expand that connection to the historic area, because the Roses and the Five and Dimes that were on Duke of Gloucester Street, and the lunch counters and the drugstores, and those stores that were very relevant to everyday life, much like the farmer's market is to our community on Saturday mornings, those stores aren't the same. So having something that is really there connecting specifically to locals as well as the tourist, I find very appealing. The farmer's market is a great example of it. So I like those aspects of it. I truly enjoy the movies on Prince George Street when they close the street for that. But the notion of a permanent screen there, I've got huge issues with that. I think we've worked very diligently in this community for years to say, okay, even if you've got a house or a business that's 2 or 3 miles away, you have to have true divided light and wood muttons and such to reflect the character of the community being colonial. And then to have something less than 100 yards away from Duke of Gloucester Street that's a giant electronic television that's always there is of concern to me. I like that notion of having it available for some special features. Maybe if the screen was one that retracted into the ground and they had limited showing hours, I find that much more appealing, because then you're deliberate about what you're showing. You're not trying to always find content. I've got some experience in finding content 24/7, and it's challenging, and making sure that it's something that everybody likes is also problematic. So those are my initial thoughts on it, and I really appreciate everybody coming out today.
I totally agree with Mr. Granger, and thanks for bringing up the point about losing parking on Duke of Gloucester Street. Both remember when you can do that. I think it'll be really a welcome addition to the Merchant Square that's finally happening after all these years. I think it's one of the better ideas relating to the downtown vibrancy plan. And it was beautifully designed by Williamsburg's best architects. What can you do? However, I do agree with staff and Mr. Granger that the digital screen is a bit out of character, and it's out of scale, regardless of the size. Permanent speaker system would be intrusive and also out of character. I think temporary video and sound when special events would be great. It'd be good to bring that Prince George Street movie time into this area. But I fully support Goodwin Plaza. I think it'll be just a great idea without the video wall.
Sure. I also agree with Mr. Granger as well as Mr. Edwards about the notion of the plaza, and I share some of the same concerns about the screen, and I think that's something we should discuss as a commission. And I think the other thing that's been brought up is the issue of parking, and again, I sort of see this as a way to bring people to downtown, and not necessarily as a deterrence, but what I do see as a deterrence, and something that I think we need to continue to talk about, is this perception of a lack of parking, and what specifically we feel we can do as a commission to help address that perception, as well as what we can do to encourage other bodies in the city to address that. I think that needs to be an important part of this conversation, no matter what we decide.
I agree with what all of my colleagues have said. I think it's this perception of parking that is kind of the main objection, reading everything in the last word and the letters that have been sent to us via email and otherwise, and all the comments here. And people are saying, well, if this plan is approved ultimately by City Council and is developed this way, the businesses are all going to suffer. But then the businesses themselves, CW being the property owner here, and then the primary tenants are saying, we want this. This is something we're looking for. So I think we have to balance that and say, well, if CW is not worried about losing business, they're actually gaining business, and the business owners are also, for the most part, excited about it. They don't share that same concern. So I think, as one of the speakers said, our job is partly to look at what's in the best interest of everyone. And I see, sort of convenience on one side for some people versus development of business and an enhanced experience for residents and for guests, tourists, and all that. So I think we are generally in support of the project as a whole. I also concur that the video screen, it sort of reminds me of when CW, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, had loudspeakers installed in the trees as you walk down Dog Street. And there would be announcements. You'd be walking down kind of in the 18th century experience, and then all of a sudden there'd be an announcement. The Fife and Drum Corps is coming down the street in 10 minutes. That was very jarring, and this sort of reminds me of that. So I'm in agreement with my colleagues on that.
For me, it's very much a question of invitation between the parking and between the Goodwin Square, and that is it more inviting to have the green space, or is it more inviting to have the parking lot? And those sound like there's an easy answer, but I really do agree with the point that convenient parking is one of the most inviting things there can be for an area. That being said, though, I think while I can see that we do lose some of the convenient parking, I think the utility gained by young families or by wayward tourists who want to find a place to sit outweighs those displaced parking lots, those parking spaces. But I do say that I agree with staff's recommendation to disallow the screen entirely. I thought on October 17th, and the first showing of it, it was entirely too big when it was almost 2 times my height, and even with the shrunken down version, still it would take away from the actual atmosphere of the lot itself, in that when you go outside, you do want to go away from screens. And I agree with the point that Andrew made that permanent speakers would take away from the area entirely. So I'm glad that CW took to heart what the Site Plan Review Committee suggested in adding that trash removal area, and I look forward to seeing their final report for the sign package. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the removal of parking for me is an interesting dynamic in that I was at a conference in Victoria, British Columbia last week, and I actually took some pictures of pocket parks where they had removed parking and literally had removed 2 parking spaces, like parallel parking spaces, and had made this like little 20-foot by 9-foot park. And I was going to send some of these things to Carolyn to share with everybody in the future as we're looking at different parts of the comprehensive plan and thinking about how to redesign parts of downtown and use some spaces that we have. I think the perception of parking has been a big issue. As somebody who lives downtown, works downtown, attends a church that's downtown, I mean, I see it all the time. I think what is one of the issues for me here when we get to sort of final site plans and things like that is I think that the design features need to not just simply be the P3, but the connectivity to the parking garage, a new and dedicated crosswalks and lights and all that kind of stuff. So I really think that we should work on that so that there is this connectivity that some folks, Sarah Bland brought up the idea of being at night and moving around and just think a little bit more broadly than that actual 1.5 acre parcel or whatever it may be. The video screen, I think, is something that I like the idea of the movies being, moved there and special events being moved there. But, when I'm in New York City, I actually purposely do not stay near Times Square because I find that area just, seen in terms of what's shown and all that. So, I mean, I think that that's a piece that really, I think we need to think a little bit more about, but I think we'll have time as we move forward. In the notion of moving us forward, though, I think that what I'm hearing is that there is no objection, or alternatively, there's approval for PCR 18-025 and PCR 18-026, which are the sort of structural changes that need to be made to move forward. If that's true, might we just have a motion and second and move those forward, and then we could talk more details about 18-027?
Sure. I motion to accept staff's recommendation on PCR 18-025 and 026.
Second that motion. Oh.
Heather? Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Schaller?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
So, Carolyn, maybe you could help us with some of this. How the recommendation currently stands is that the video wall shall not be included as bullet point 1, but then in bullet point 2 is that there can be effectively a temporary video thing for 3 days and for no more than 3 days and for no more than 15 times a year. Could you speak a little bit about that? Because I guess that number seemed a little bit small, just given the fact that if you just think about the summertime movies, that's pretty close to 15 right there, it seems like.
We
So I don't want there
figured
to be
it was about 10 days for the summertime movies.
Okay.
And the 3 days comes into play because 3 days or less, we call that a temporary event. So we have those all downtown. If the commission thinks a few more than 15 times a year is better than what staff recommends, I mean, that's up to the commission. But that's what staff was looking at, probably about 10 days for the movies and then 5 other events of 3 days and in length over the year. So that's what staff was looking at in that regard.
And then the other part for me on that is that in moving this forward, is any of this something that can have like a 1 or 2 year time on it, so that if we actually see, this is something that we really enjoy and 15 times is making us having to make competition decisions about, do we actually show the final of the World Cup when the U.S. is actually in the World Cup, or do we not have a movie? How does CW maybe come back and say, we've been doing this, we would rather do some other things, maybe we've shown the community that a video screen isn't the worst, or, what kind of options do we have moving forward?
You could come back and amend the use permit to allow more days, similar to what we just did for the recommendation for the school for the bike shelter.
Okay, so it'd be something like that. Okay.
Right, Jim.
Okay, cool. So with regard to all of these bullets and or addition or removal of any of them, do folks have other questions or other parts of discussion?
I wonder if we could vote on the screen separately from the plaza.
Screen separately.
You could vote on it separately, that it's been addressed. I don't know exactly. You could approve everything else and then go back, but then you would have to modify what you had done if you want to allow the screen. It seems awkward to me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay. It seemed like there was a consensus that everybody was good with the plaza, and
right.
There were some reservations about the screen and the size and the shape and how. There were a lot of questions remaining about the screen, and this might give the applicant time to come back and refine what type of screen would be, whether it's one that retracts into the ground or it's an inflatable, or that's what I'm thinking. I'd like to go ahead and maybe get some path forward on the park, and then give the applicant time to readdress the screen as a separate item.
Well, on that note, can they come back if we recommend approval and council adopts 180127? We have it without the screen at all, with permission for temporary.
And they could come back.
Can we add the screen?
Yeah, modification.
They could come back with something entirely new and something specific that's not. It's not just, we're making it smaller, right. Something more specific, more concrete, and add it back.
No, I think that staff's comments and conditions are apropos.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with my questions to Carolyn, I think the video wall not being included as presently presented, I think everyone is in agreement with that. The number 2, giving them this opportunity to trial it, I'm comfortable with that. I'm actually thinking that 15 may be too few, given some of the things that I'm thinking of. But in, I guess, offering this idea of a trial, I think that also covers, Greg's comment of them being able to come back and say, we could do something different, or once we see that. And I guess part of it is if we just remove 1 and 2, if we're silent on the 1 and 2, I guess, then what will happen is that Carolyn's recommendation will go to City Council, and ours will be sort of like the minority report kind of thing in terms of what is the alternative. So I think that we do have some agreement to some parts of this. So I think that at least including the parts that we agree on that would be helpful.
Well, okay, now I'm confused. If we take out 1 and 2, then we're recommending approval of the screen as proposed, but none of us want to approve. None of us.
Okay, so I'm saying, okay, so it would be recommending removing 2. Thank you, James. If we remove 2,
yeah, that's more consistent.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I think we all agree to 1, sorry, on that. And I guess the second is, with 2, do people want to see a trial with the temporary, or do we want to just remove 2 and see if they come back with some alternative?
As far as days allowed per year?
Or what the equipment will be. I think it opens everything up.
I like the idea of having a trial. I don't think we really have sufficient information to make a decision about a permanent structure there.
I think allowing 2 allows a trial.
Yeah.
Keep 2 in there.
Yeah, I think Mr. Duncan mentioned just moving the Prince George movie
Yeah.
in. So we already sort of have a trial, and we're just sort of moving it
Right.
To a little more central place that doesn't block a street.
So I think that, well, I don't think we have unanimity here. I think there is a consensus. Is someone willing to make a motion?
I guess before we move, I
Sure,
wanted
please.
to just jump in that if we are keeping number 2, that maybe it's worth having a discussion about the idea of 15 times.
Sure. No, I'm good for that, too.
Something else that the commission could also do for number 2 is not only the days, but you could put a time limit and create a trial period. So you could put a year on it or 2 years on it. So that's an option the commission can also have.
And that's what we did last month with something else with regard to
The outdoor
events, yeah.
Events, yeah.
Right. So I'm happy to entertain an alternative number, 20?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, while 15 seems too low, none of us maybe know the optimal amount. Sure. But between, for me, movies, sporting events, any sort of regular events around Williamsburg, 15 seems far too low. So 20 to 30 I would be comfortable with.
Okay, so I mean, currently we have the 10 movie nights. Carolyn, you said you counted. So if we did 20, that would be 10 movie nights and 10 other things. Would that be a trial, or 25? I mean,
slightly less than every weekend in the year, too, is another way to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
25.
25?
25 sound good, or anybody have a problem?
I mean, at some point, it's just temporary becomes permanent.
Right.
If
So
it gets to that point, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So we're saying 25?
I think we're saying 25. Okay.
I recommend that we recommend approval for PCR 18-027, pending the, including the conditions enumerated by staff, with the change in number 2 from not more than 15 times per year to not more than 25 times per year.
Second that motion.
Any further discussion? Heather?
Mr. Granger?
No.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Ms. Macbeth?
Aye.
Mr. Edwards?
Aye.
Mr. Schaller?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Thank you. That brings us to our open forum, if anyone wishes to come forward and speak on any other issue we have in front of us. Seeing no one. I'm sorry. Someone coming up? Yes, please come forward and state your name and address, please.
It's Tina Taverna. I'm a volunteer at the Farmers Market, and I've been doing it for 15 years, and many times people will stop in just to see a vendor, and they'll stop into the parking lot. I understand where the park is going to be an asset. I'm very sad that we're going to lose that portion of the parking lot. My husband and I have frequented the Kimball Theater for years and years, and we loved parking in there in the evening and just walking across the street. So that will be a loss. Before I came in here today, I was talking to my daughter from Northern Virginia. She and her family come down quite often, and we use Colonial Williamsburg a lot. We have 12 grandchildren. My daughter Jessica said, "Mom, if there was a screen in that park that they're going to put in," she has 4 little children, "I wouldn't bring them there." I mean, right now, I think the problem with our society is that the children are glued to the iPhone or something technical that they're looking at even when they're young. They've got little things. So for her to bring her child into the park with the splash park and all that, that sounds all good, but just the thoughts of that screen being up there, kids are mesmerized no matter what's on that screen. So I'm just saying that if somehow that screen can be avoided, I think that would make the moms that were here today, they talked about the children sitting there, but if that screen has got something on it, they're going to be looking at that screen. So anyways, I just had to bring that up, and that, yes, we'll miss the parking area, but I can understand that the parking area is going to be replaced by something beautiful, but I don't think we need any kind of a visible screen that children would be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to come forward? Then that concludes our business for today. There are no site plans and subdivisions or unfinished business. Is there new business? Other? We have in our computerized screen packets that we now get all these other details of the city business that we can look at. Our next gathering will be on November 28th, when the comprehensive plan work session for November will be held, and we'll have a presentation on Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And then our next public hearing is December 19th, where we have 2 zoning ordinance modifications that we have to do some housekeeping there. But if there's nothing else for the good of the group, we are adjourned.
Thank you.